June 20th, call our June 20th Town Council Committee meeting to order. And I'm just going to read this item for the public record. During committee meetings, the council chair may recognize staff and identified members of the public to contribute during the discussion. At the end of the discussion of an agenda item, the chair will provide a brief opportunity for the public to offer comments related to the agenda item. Comments should not be repetitive, and the committee chair reserves the right to limit a speaker's time. And I would add to that, at the end of our committee meetings, we are going to also offer an opportunity for comment. So having said that, roll call shows all members of the council are present. And we'll move on to the first item, which is Finance and Operations Committee. And the purpose of this item is to see if there is any further review of the proposed town budget. As everybody knows, we, by consensus, agreed on a budget June 6th to present at the public hearing. We had our public hearing on June 13th. We received no particular public input on the town budget. And this is our final review before we take it up June 27th rather, for enactment. Sophie, anything you want to add to that?
No, just that once we do the orders, when we put the orders together, we are pulling apart pieces of the budget to fit into orders. It will be very hard to make changes from the floor in budget orders. So if there's an issue, today is really the day to try to address those issues.
Any comments from committee on the budget?
Can I just maybe point of clarification that once we've talked about something, we're done talking about an item. That's typically how they work. Okay.
I mean, usually.
Yeah, that's by design, right?
Can you elaborate? I don't know if I follow exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a bit disappointed that we weren't willing or able to consider not backfilling positions, but we've had that discussion, so I don't think it's appropriate probably to bring it up and pitch for that again, is what I'm getting at, is my assumption. Just kind of, I don't know if that's Robert's rules or just kind of how, you know what I mean?
It wasn't an actual, I guess it was an action item. We did take a vote on it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm actually pleased that we have lowered our projected municipal tax rate from last year. So I think that's a feat in and of itself. So I'm happy with where we stand.
Yeah, I'm pleased that we have two, and I think voters will be pleased for this year. And I am also concerned that that's being done in part with ARPA money that isn't going to last forever. So we do still have a large operations increase that I think will come back to bite us in future years. But you know, to echo Leo, I don't see the need to belabor it at this meeting, other than to note that it is a concern of mine.
Appreciate that. Any other comments?
I mean, I'm grateful that we have the ARPA money this year.
Yes.
I'm grateful that we have full 5% funding from revenue sharing. Very grateful for that. That has made a huge difference in this budget. The ARPA funding also has made a huge difference, and I feel like we've spent it very responsibly on one-time individual purchases that are not going to be recurring, which is also, I think, very responsible. And thanks to Cheryl for her idea to look at financing that equipment purchase, so we could, come in at a much lower number than we started with. I appreciate all the hard work.
Anything else from the group? There is no need to take any particular action other than to see if there was any discussion or comment. And as of now, the budget will be brought forward on the 27th, the way we have last seen it. There will be several orders, so don't get confused by the number of orders, because we're not doing anything other than approving the budget that went to hearing that you've seen.
And I will just add, if I could, that some of the orders that you will see on the budget that will get published either Wednesday or Thursday might be confusing to folks who have not been through this process before. I will do my best to try to explain it in the document, in the summary information, but that's something, there will be a lot on consent. If you have questions, please just let me know. They are fairly routine, but just because I've been doing it for a while, it feels routine, and it might not be for you.
Ready to move on?
Should we ask the public if they would like
Oh,
to?
Beg your pardon, and thank you. We did say we would provide an opportunity to the public. I don't know whether we have any public there who would like to comment on this
Well, it
item.
looks like Paul and Frederica are watching, but I don't know if they wish to comment.
I cannot see that part.
Paul and Frederica are in fact here watching, so.
So this is the opportunity for any public comment on this item. So if anybody has a comment, they should raise their hand. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next item. I guess we will move on. Okay, and pass the baton to Jeff for Community Development Committee.
Sure. We have one item on our agenda tonight, but it's a fairly large one. So we're going to take it in chunks. This is the implementation of the town diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And, you know, this is a process that started prior to my tenure on council. And in that time, there has been some change in the language. So we've had a recommendation that we should call this the JEDI to include justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I've been doing some reading recently. Some people have talked about belonging, DIB, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm going to use DEI as a shorthand because that's the language in our documents. But if we want to change that language, probably tonight is a good opportunity to talk about how we view that. So when I was thinking about how we would do this, I sent Sophie and Tom a note and I asked if it might be appropriate, since we have some new people on the council and on the committee, whether we should go through and just see what we've done so far. So I put together, and I think you've probably seen it in the background materials, DEI recommendations and actions template or table. This has a column of the 10 recommendations of the ad hoc DEI committee. The work that the town has done to date on those recommendations and supplemental work that the council has made, or recommendations that the council has made on those. And I think it's probably a good place to start with the intent that the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee was the first recommendation of the ad hoc commission. It is the one thing that we have not as a council touched yet. So we know that's going to be our big job tonight. I'd like to talk about the other 9 first, just real briefly. Are there things among those other 9 recommendations that we do not feel comfortable in the progress that we've made, or that we should maybe talk about taking new action on or other action on? These include things like requiring annual DEI training, use a DEI lens when we're making decisions and setting policy, strengthening partnerships with the university, increasing transparency of town government, using DEI lens when we are in our hiring practices, in our personnel practices, creating equitable systems, promote, recognize diverse populations in Orono, and provide strategic support in DEI to our emergency services, celebrate diversity within our community, conduct a detailed assessment of Orono's disability, accessibility, and safety opportunities, or we're not limited to those. If there are other issues that we should address, I think we could always add to this list.
Can I'd like to add something to this.
Yes.
One of the glaring things, and mostly because I work in environment and with that crowd of people, is environmental justice. And environmental justice is also a DEI issue. It's a social issue, and it falls in a municipality under zoning and land use and what would be another place, economic development possibly. But environmental justice is a big issue with the feds right now. It's a big issue with the state right now. There are definitions. And it's something that if we're gonna look at this, then we also need to look at we also need to look at how we zone our town and how we offer opportunities for manufacturing and things like that, making sure that they're A, not that close to the river, or B, not that close to marginal populations. So I think that's an issue. I don't think that we have a problem with it. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that Orono has any problem, and I don't feel like that Orono has a problem with any of these things. But I'm just saying that if we're gonna do this, then we also need to add environmental justice to
Yeah,
this.
Cheryl, I think it would be great to have it on paper,
Mhm.
digital or paper, partly because of the reasons you outlined, and partly because it will allow us to stay on track with things that we've discussed, making priorities, like consulting with the Penobscot Nation over anything that involves the waterways around Orono, or so that we can solidify those initiatives.
Yeah, and I just feel like that's the one that's kind of glaring to me that wasn't part of the original pilot group recommendations.
That sounds great. I think we can add that into our list of sort of lenses that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I can get you a definition of that too, because that has been defined.
Good. Anything else that we should talk about? And this doesn't mean that we won't come back and we can't spiral back and talk about these things again, but this is just like on the face of it. Do we have any omissions? Do we have any errors? Do we have glaring opportunities to advance our DEI goals that we've not taken advantage of in everything except for the Jedi Committee, because that's going to be the big thing to talk about. Okay. Well, good. So I was thinking about how we should structure this, and in the materials that I asked Sophie to share with you, I proposed 3 questions, and really the questions seem similar, but they have different ideas. So the first question is really, what is the purpose of a DEI committee in Orono? What does the council think specifically this DEI committee, which we're envisioning, should do? And then given the charge, what should this DEI committee look like? What should be the makeup of the committee? So one is a very sort of ideals-based question, one is a very policy-based question, and one is a very operations-based question. So my preference is to go around and have everybody just in answer to that, if you are willing to answer each question in turn, share one thing. And the reason I ask everybody to share one thing is because then we don't have somebody sharing 3 things and somebody else saying, yeah, me too, on that, with like check marks next to the most popular items. Because sometimes I think in this work, it's the least popular items, or it's the most unique items that offer us the best, like the new way to see something. So if we could just, we can go around 100 times, doesn't matter to me. But if everybody would like to, or be willing to share sort of one of their ideals, I guess that might be a good place to start. I can always start if nobody wants to, but I suspect that people have lots of ideas about what a DEI committee, what the purpose of a DEI committee is. So what is in our ideal world, what is the purpose of the DEI committee?
I mean, I can go first, I suppose. I think is to help show us the things that we're not seeing as people who lead or make a lot of decisions for this town. I think by the very nature of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, these are issues that are not going to be immediately apparent to those who have some modicum of power. So some representation for communities who otherwise aren't getting a lot of voice or whose perspectives aren't really yet being taken into consideration. And the ways in which they're not being taken into consideration, we don't really know, because they're not being taken into consideration. So I think I'm set enough there for now.
Should we go around in a circle or popcorn or?
I think we could just shut them up. I would rather hear from people.
Sure. I think another goal is to set a tone of welcome and a tone of folks having a voice and people who look like them and represent them, or they can identify with in some way that's maybe greater than any person on this council, where they know who to go to talk to about an idea or an issue that they've had in town. So it's kind of like community outreach, I guess, would be just the way I'd frame that. It's a community outreach endeavor.
Can I ask what
Sure.
you mean? Do you mean like they would have this committee to go to instead of the town
Yeah,
council?
so I'm saying, like, as a concrete example, say there is a DEI committee that includes a representative who is a member at the Islamic Center. And then if there's someone else who identifies as a Muslim, they might have a person they already know and can relate to, who they might feel more comfortable bringing an idea or an issue, if they don't know any of us personally, for example. And so it's a way of just building more representation into the information that we as a council get in order to, help folks in town feel heard, and also, as Rob said, provide us with more information about perspectives that otherwise we might not be privy to.
How do you feel about just asking questions?
Fine.
Do you, okay, good. Do you see this as complaint driven? Like I have a complaint and I want to talk to somebody who understands where I'm coming from? Or do you see it as I have something I want to get done and I want to talk, and I'll use the Islamic Center as an example. I am Muslim. I feel like I don't have enough. I don't know. Muslim friends. But I don't want to talk to council. I don't want to bring it to Sophie. I want to bring it to this committee, but it has to have some kind of a cultural bent to it, right? So do you see it as I only need to talk to somebody when there's a problem, or I need to talk to somebody? So I guess that's what I'm
Yeah, I
trying.
don't see it necessarily as being
this.
complaint driven. I see it more as getting more folks involved. And I don't see that as necessarily solving a problem. I see it more as a positive opportunity.
Okay.
That's almost a number 2 question, because I think we'll do a deep dive into what the charge of this committee is in Orono. I've seen Bangor's example. I think it's a great model for Bangor. I think our model could be and probably should be a little bit different. But before we get to that point of what are they going to do, what is their job? I've seen examples of DEI committees that have had great success, really have been embraced by their communities and have in turn embraced their communities. And I've seen some examples of some situations where it's been a very adversarial relationship. My vision of a DEI committee is one that really sees themselves, the committee members see themselves as invested members of the town and community, and not separate outsiders, looking into the community. So I think it's, for me, an ideal of a DEI community is the integration of committee members with the community in lots of different ways. So we can talk about how that operationalizes later, but just that sense that the DEI committee members are part of our community and they don't sit separate from it, I think is very important to me.
I agree. So one of the things that I have is that ideally for me, a DEI committee would develop policies, practices, or help the town develop policies, practices, attitudes, and actions that acknowledge and address discrepancies in access to resources and opportunities. That would, for me, be what I would want it to be like the primary focus of such a committee. And a lot of the underpinning of that is kind of what you just expressed, Jeff, like that there have been versions of such a committee floated by members of the public in this community and other communities, or have come to existence in other communities where it is almost pitched as like an oversight. And I think that, like you're saying, that introduces a level of adversarial relationship that I don't know if that actually ends up serving anyone. And so the idea that it would be to work cooperatively with the town and the council, just to ensure that everyone is having equal access to resources and opportunities in the town in every place that we have control over.
Any other big ideal level?
I guess I would say the policy development piece outside of council, that's probably normal, I think, to leverage outside resources at times, but I don't see handing off policy development.
No, I didn't, that's not what I'm saying.
All
No,
right.
because we went through it like, when we were talking about this previously, before this council was seated, there was a lot of talk about like, are we handing off work, or is policy being driven? And that was not something that at that time that we were talking about, and that's not what I mean. When I say help the town develop policies, practices, attitudes, and actions, what I mean is similarly to what Rob was saying, to help us see the things we can't see. And so when we are looking at a policy about rental regulation, for example, or parking ordinances, am I missing a big piece of the equation because I'm not thinking of it? Like I will bring a perspective of socioeconomic diversity to some of these policy conversations we have, but there are also limits to other perspectives that I can bring. So can we get input on policies that we're considering from folks that might say, hey, I don't think you considered how this might impact this group of people.
Thanks for clarifying. In my mind, that it's not a formalized policy, but it is an open process, so that is already can happen. So I guess, are we thinking that this policy is kind of a tentacles out into other groups, or like, is that?
When you say that
well,
it can happen, do you mean like someone could come to a committee meeting? Yeah, and I think that's the point of having a specific body that we're intentionally creating and asking for input from, because a lot of the things, and I brought this up when we were kind of talking about like captioning or whatever, just because something is available doesn't mean that it's accessible. So yeah, okay, technically anyone could come in off the street and give us input on policy that we're discussing, but in what ways does this setup create barriers for people to come and give that input? They don't feel comfortable, they don't know how the system works, they have to work a night shift, so they can't be here at this time, they have kids, I mean, there's like all of these different demographic or identity related reasons why just saying, well, you could show up, you didn't, is like a barrier. Do you know what I mean? So this is an intentional way to try to invite as many voices into the conversation as possible. Very similarly to your desire to have more public comment. Honestly, I think there's a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, that's right. But I guess that's my point. It is there, and this is, so I guess I'm envisioning. I'm still trying to figure out what, if this is a necessary thing in my mind, to be perfectly candid. And if it's that, okay, we have a formalized committee that will be that outreach that, you know, we don't do, but we publicize everything. Maybe that, I don't know what that type of, we're gonna get to what the makeup would be, I guess, but what would they have to reach out more so than the town does is where I'm struggling a little bit, but just asking questions.
Or just
so.
bringing insight.
Mhm.
Not necessarily, maybe reaching out, but maybe just providing insight, a diversity of insight that doesn't exist in this room and that this process doesn't necessarily invite.
Thanks.
If I can, you said something about not wanting to put any kind of policy development in the hands of this committee? I mean, do we not do something like that with other committees?
That's not quite what I meant. So there was a lot of conversation when we were starting to form this board about and we'll get to this, I'm sure, when we talk about operations, but about that there were not having a model of this where it was as though we were being given directives by a committee, like an oversight committee, to say like, so that ultimately the council is elected by the voters and we are the final say. And that we will invite input from any number of committees, staff members, members of the public, but ultimately we were elected and the final authority of decision-making rests with council.
No, I understand. I think, so when I think about this, and maybe this is sort of blurring your first and second question, Jeff. I look at the Bangor model, and I know that you've mentioned, and I've heard before in other council meetings that I've watched, people saying, well, we're not Bangor. But I'm maybe in first look, I'm not seeing where exactly like some of the basic parts of the mission that the Bangor committee puts forward aren't like useful in common sense or in any ways just because of Bangor size. I'm not seeing, this is a very long sentence that I'm saying here. Sorry. Basically what I'm trying to get at here is that I don't see anything in at least that committee's mission that jumps out to me as something specific or special regarding the differences between us and Bangor. So I'm just curious to hear the ways in which you see some of Bangor's committee not being applicable or their
Yeah,
model.
I actually think their mission statement is excellent. And what I think their process is that they shall have one representative from a particular group, and another representative from it. So they have a board of 12. We'll get into this. This is an operational thing, but they have a board of 12, right? They don't separate, Bangor does not separate its school from its municipal government in the same way that we do. So they have a school representative on their municipal DEI committee as, essentially in an administrative role. And that is probably not appropriate for us, given our relationship with the RSU, that like our legal relationship with the RSU. They have a goal in there that they will have committee members that belong to certain organizations that are present in Bangor, but that are not necessarily present in Orono. So those kinds of things. So I don't have a problem or really a question really about the goals that Bangor set out. I think they're quite similar actually, but I think operationally we might have some difference there. The one thing that Megan just said that I really appreciate is that availability doesn't equal accessibility. Clarifies something that I was having trouble putting into words. And I kind of look at it like, it's a wheelchair ramp, that's a metaphor, not an actual wheelchair ramp. Just saying that there's a ramp doesn't get anybody up that ramp, right? I mean, so the DEI committee in my mind is it's the instrument that allows people to access the things that are available to all of us as citizens in Oregon. So I don't think it has a particular power that the rest of us don't have, or that a regular citizen wouldn't have, but I think it does provide that sort of instrument of access that not everybody has. So, I really like that.
As well as being a source of useful advice. We have a tree committee and a beautification committee that do wonderful work on behalf of the town and have expertise that is an asset. And I think this would be similar.
Yeah.
So I think of two words, if I think of the purpose, advise and focus. Keep us focused on these issues that in the busy world of municipal government, we may lose focus on sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, Cheryl's being able to bring to and speak to this example of environmental justice, which was missing in our existing documents, is a great example of how diversity of perspective allows us to bring to bear what some of us may have forgotten.
I just want to, because I hadn't looked at the Bangor thing, I was going to ask, and then I thought, hey, with the internet right here, I can just look.
The World Wide Web is at your fingertips, Leo.
But, and I think their mission, I think I'm on board with, except for B, I do have issues with, because review and advise city staff regarding policies and practices. I think that gets into, I mean, we're not technically, as a board, even that operational. As a council, we're not that operational. And I don't see a board that's a subset of us being that operational. That's doesn't make sense to me. Because I don't think that's necessarily our role. So aside from, I mean, I think the other three make sense.
See, I go back and forth on that a lot because I think it's such an opportunity for staff to receive technical guidance that they may not have access to, just in the same way that we have a lot of different, the environmental committee is a great example. We have technical guidance available should staff want it. Like, we have these experts in their field who can advise staff if they need technical guidance about anything. And that's not to say that they're giving directive to staff, but like, they're a resource for staff that we would then not necessarily have to go either chasing our tails and trying to find somebody to help guide a certain process, or we would just miss the boat on something completely because we didn't, you know what I mean?
I think that's a very different perspective than what Leo read. I agreed with Leo when he said that didn't seem to be consistent with our view, but when you say resource to staff,
Yeah.
that
Right.
I
think
like that.
I'm reading this more like oversight, and perhaps that is the difference of what we're talking about here. Review and advise. That doesn't necessarily mean oversight. That is sort of how I was reading it.
And the environment committee doesn't advise without being asked.
Yeah.
So it's on an as needed kind of basis. It's not we have to do this.
Service
This is a
resource.
directive. It's, hey, does, Dan Dixon know how to do?
Dan Dixon
solar?
knows how to do everything.
Dan Dixon knows how to do everything, Dan.
Are you listening, Dan? You know everything.
But it is as needed. It's not, so when staff reaches out, they know that there's a place there to vet something.
Mhm.
So yes, so I agree with Leo, the one that you read doesn't sit, I disagree with that part of the mission. For Orono.
So let's save that for questions
we-
2 and.
We skipped ahead. We're
Well,
bad
let's skip
students,
ahead.
Jim.
Yeah,
We're
I know.
unruly. We're gonna need
The, So I just want to make sure that when we leave here, and we're going to ask Sophie and staff to maybe put together some language then that we can tear apart again, that we're giving them a starting point anyway. And so what I hear is that people are saying that a DEI committee, however it is formed, should be based on the idea of bringing to council and staff perspectives that we don't necessarily have ourselves, but it sets a tone of welcome for people across our community, that it engages the committee members as citizens of the town and not as sort of a separated perspective, and that it helps facilitate accessibility. However we define that, right? Helps people access town and council and services as in ways that maybe they were having trouble accessing those before. Does that, we could go from there and generate language. We could also use the things. I'd like to take a break at the end of each of these questions and see if there's public comment, because I hate to put off public comment till the very end if somebody has something that is relevant to our early discussion. So Belle, do we have any public comment now? Okay, well, we're inviting public comment on our first part. I know you guys just walked in, but feel free. All right, well, let's move. Oh, yes.
We were tuning in via Zoom. We thought that it was slightly later on the agenda, so we thought it would be, we wanted to talk, basically, as a person of color, here in Orono, I personally think that having a town diversity.
Excuse me. Sorry to speak from the ether, but if we have in-person public comment, could we invite them to the table so that we could actually see them on camera and hear them better on the remote?
And actually, they identify themselves as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Leo, we're gonna go the other way.
What's that?
All right. See, for you. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And you need to speak towards that unit.
Sounds great. Okay, so yes, hi, my name is Katarina Hoover. I'm a master's student at University of Maine. And so as someone who has been in Orono for a few years and as someone who basically I've worked in Orono for a few years, I personally think that given some of my experiences at school and working here, I think it's useful to have a town diversity, equity, and inclusion goal, just like have something in place. I think that's just a good starting ground. Like maybe you don't have to flesh out all the details right now, but just starting it, figuring out how it works, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have other opportunities as we go along for public comment as well. Yes, sorry, I will project. All right, let's move on to our second, and this I really think may be a little bit of a weightier conversation. Given this purpose that we want to provide access to people who are having difficulty accessing us or our services, and that we want to hear from voices that we're not hearing, what is the actual charge of a DEI committee in Orono? And I say charge broadly. This could be operational things. We think they should meet quarterly or monthly, or this can be a bigger charge, right? Like a purposeful charge. So, yeah. What do we think about the role and the charge of a committee? Yes.
In sort of preparing for this meeting, went back to looked over a bunch of documents. One of this is this Town of Orono Inclusion and Equity Toolkit.
Yeah.
And I think this document is wonderful and has a lot of great ideas in it, and I might suggest basically doing this, the charge of a diversity committee, and then the committee itself there are a lot of these that are things that can be accomplished and checked off. And then there are some things in this document that are perhaps more of an ongoing process. And the committee could perhaps decide for itself which of these things it wanted to take on as a charter for ongoing process and which of them they wanted to accomplish or pass off to other leadership through other mechanisms. But this felt to me like a really thoughtful starting place that we already have drafted.
We do have to come up with a charge to put the ad hoc committee together first. So
Yes.
we do need language.
Or perhaps,
Prior, I mean, we can't let the committee decide their charge. We have to decide what their charge is. They can decide what they do with it, but we have to decide what their charge is. to
sure,
put their- to put
Could-
the-
could
so
a
what is their
charge-
Yeah,
I'm still new here, but could a charge be to oversee implementation of the town's inclusion and equity toolkit to assess policies, initiatives, programs, and budgets with the ongoing mandate after a year spent working on this endeavor to be decided in coordination with council as to ongoing work past a year of working on this. As a starting place for discussion.
Well, so the interesting thing about this toolkit is like, in drafting it, it's pulled from, and the intent of its existence was some sort of mechanism to help guide council's process. It's resourced through other municipalities that I found to be regionally or economically, or like just that's similar enough. Like, obviously, I did look at places like major cities like Seattle, Milwaukee, but there are also like budgetary situations that make some of the things that they can do impossible for us.
Yeah.
But like, so in drafting this, my goal was to try to come up with some sort of mechanism for council to use to evaluate policy. And then as we kind of worked with it, it does seem to occupy like a gray area between, is this for staff to do operations? Is this for council to talk about policy? Or is this kind of a structural document that the committee could use in its process? And I think that that's kind of where we left it when we kind of segued right before the election into waiting to bring it up again with the new council. So the problem with, I mean, I will say the problem with this document, I will admit to my own problems, that the problem with this document is that it's not very clear about exactly who, like, it includes all three of those perspectives kind of mashed together. And I think that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Sorted out, yeah.
So is the goal of a DEI committee in Orono advisory, or is it an operational committee? Like, does it do the job that is currently being done by a segment of staff or the council, or does it advise all of the jobs that are being done? My preference is that it is a broadly advisory group. But that's my preference. I mean, that's, we can discuss it. Is that I want to have as many people offering as much good advice on as many subjects as possible. And I don't want to deconstruct the process that we have with our staff and council now. Unless we have a good reason to do so.
I initially thought a lot about the ways in which such a council could look at the things that we are doing to function in an advisory role there. But then and I'm not saying that I don't think that now, but then the more that I have sat with it, I also think that it's an opportunity. I don't quite know how to say this, like, let me think about this. I'll come back to it. I want to say this right because I'm not quite sure if I will be clear if I say it.
So when you contrasted it serving an advisory role to something else, could you repeat again?
Sure. I think council has been elected to do the things that council does, like set policy, approve, create and approve budgets, things like that. Staff is hired to do the things that staff does.
Yeah.
I think there is a role to have this, this group with a whole set of different perspectives to advise those operations that go on. But I don't think that we have a charge or a mandate to divest either the council or the staff of the responsibility to do their work and farm it out to a committee. I think that betrays the trust that we have, and I think it puts a burden on somebody who's volunteering their time. So
that all sounds right to me. I guess I just want to make clear that I do think at some level, and maybe this is not at all in counter to what's been said so far, that they should be involved at some level in relevant policy making. Like if it means like we're sending if we are looking to review applicable ordinances, policies, and programs, sending them to the committee for review the way that we do to other committees, and then having it come back to us to ensure that it meets their standards and that they've also done work that we, don't have time to do in this meeting.
Yeah, that, one of the sort of operational type things that I had brought up when we did a version of this question and answer thing several months ago was that I envisioned feedback coming almost like in the form of our planning board recommendations. Obviously, the planning board, that's a whole different legal relationship there, and this is not, I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is like, we talk about, you know, in the comp plan committee, we talk about all these things and with Kyle and like, this is what we think is the right thing. And then we send it to the planning board where people who have a very specific way of looking at these policies will give us feedback and the public will give us feedback. And then they write us a letter and say, these are the things we thought were working and these are the things that we're not sure and maybe you should take another look at. And I thought that would be a helpful thing. And something you said made me, I think, be able to clarify what I wanted to say earlier when you were saying like farm it out to a committee as being like, and I agree. In addition to an advisory role on the things that council is doing, I would like to have the relationship between this committee and council and staff also be one where part of the advisory role is for us to be able to, on ways that we can learn and unlearn things, so that we are not farming things out to a committee and saying, well, send it to the DEI committee so that they can give it the check mark, because I don't know. I don't want to ever sit here and say like, I'm not responsible for making this decision because I am a white person, or like send it off to the diversity committee. I think that that's like shunning a responsibility. And I would like to see part of this relationship be about council and staff learning and unlearning behaviors and ways of looking at things and ways of operating.
I have a question. Maybe it's too detailed for this, but would this committee operate kind of similar to the way we are, in that it's all public? It's all public.
So the answer to that is if you create the committee and you appoint the people to the committee, yes, it has to, by law, be a completely public process.
Okay, meetings open to public and everything. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it has to be on this whole fancy setup, but it has to be open.
Published agendas in advance and that sort of thing.
Is there any reason it wouldn't be on this fancy setup? If we want to call the owl fancy, I'm not sure.
So
Maybe take
the
some liberty
environment
there.
committee doesn't- we are teach, but we don't stream. I don't stream with Facebook. So we meet, it's a public meeting. We're on Zoom. Anyone can join us, but we don't.
And then those get
stream.
posted.
Yeah.
So people can go.
Mhm.
I mean, when I started, it was just Nancy's little tape recorder.
Changed a
So
lot.
things have changed a
is
lot
fancy. I'm
in
gonna take
5,
it
6
all
years.
On the issue of for lack of a better term, the farming out that we want to avoid, I think making it so it's not just a committee that we're just sending things to for review, I think also giving it some active role in its own right of, yeah, like some charge of also having a creative role, like proposing, say like changes to ordinances or something for us to take up.
Do you think those proposals come to council?
Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe after being developed in committee, brought to council for review, and we can discuss. If we have more questions, we can send it back with those questions the way that we, I think, are doing with other committees. And they can also be engaged in some of the work of thinking through how we're making more publicly available the information about the accessibility work that we're doing. To ensure that there is in fact accessibility, because if people don't know that it's not accessible, as said, if you were to. So just like those are a few ideas for like active charges, where they're not just like waiting for us to tell them what to do.
I think it's important that, I think it's important that happens. I also think it's important that the DEI committee understand that it's in a relationship with the council, because I would hate some poor guy out there plowing snow, right? And then you have somebody like, that's not his or her job, right? I mean, the staff is doing their job, right? And our job is really to get that feedback. Like I think we need to provide a layer of protection to the people, the operational staff of the town.
I see what you're saying is like to have people come in, give public complaint in a way that right now it's just coming to staff in a way that is less visible.
Right. And I just fear that, two things can happen. One can be somebody is out there doing their job to the best of their ability, following every policy that we have established for them. And they could be subjected to criticism, which they have no recourse to correct, right? I mean, and I think that leads to a lot of frustration, both on the part of the person who's offering the criticism and on the person who's trying to do their job, right? So I think however we formalize it, I think it has to be explicit that the DEI committee works with council and doesn't supervise staff.
In the same way that in our charter, we do not supervise staff.
Right.
By law.
Right.
We supervise this one staff and she supervises everybody else. And if we want her to change something about the way services are being offered by our staff members, we bring that up to her and not interact with individual staff members doing their jobs.
Yes.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't propose necessarily a supervisory role. I think that just like puts too much work on them as people. They're not. I think people are going to bring complaints to that committee, which I think is good. But I think, I'm not proposing a change to the.
But in giving them the agency to say this is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Then one of the things that I assume will probably happen is going to be very similar to when we bring things to Sophie, like somebody stops me on the bridge and complains to me about how they like to go out for their walks and the sidewalks weren't plowed and they da-da-da-da-da. And then I go to Sophie and have a conversation with Sophie, and then that filters out into a conversation with council, a conversation with Public Works, and however, or one of the things like if one of us has an idea and we say, Sophie, I have this idea that like maybe we could do better at this. Sophie's brain, because this is her job, clicks on and goes, red, oh, green light, like, oh my gosh, there's this ordinance that I've been thinking about bringing to council, and I bet we could get into that ordinance and we could change this and it might help that thing that you're noticing. I think that a similar, I could envision if we're giving this committee the agency of it being a two-way street, that I would be more surprised if they were like, here's some specific policy we would like you to implement. And it might be more informally like, hey, here is something that seems to be lacking in this community. How can we address that? And like we're working with staff to find the actual mechanism to address that thing that they may not know because it's not their job to know. Just like it's not my job to know, but it's her job to know.
Well, I imagine a survey similar to the one that the ad hoc committee last year put together, perhaps revised in some way, could be done on an annual basis by that committee and reviewed. And the input from that survey was anonymous, which I think allows for more honest answers. And they could develop some recommendations each year out of that, or even to gauge how we're doing with the work that they're doing and that we're doing. Maybe even change the questions year to year in relationship to the kind of policies that we're working on to ensure that we're on the right track.
What about a review of all current policies? I listened to the presentation from the ad hoc committee, and I think they're very clear up front. We did not tackle that because that would be probably a monstrous job. But I think about when we went through school consolidation, we had 3 school systems becoming one, and there was a full-time policy committee trying to meld 3 into one, obviously, which is probably more work than this would be. I don't know how whether it's our charter or our policies, I don't know how old they are, but presumably there's probably language in there that needs to be looked at. That seems like kind of a staple of, there's a starting point of let's update. And they wouldn't be updating, but they would be identifying and bringing forward things that are maybe not appropriate or just old and need to be updated.
So one of the formal jobs of this committee would be to review policy and make recommendations to the town. council.
Yeah, that seems like a,
Seems like a
Yeah.
reasonable.
Can I just clarify, when you say policy, do you mean council policy? Or do you mean individual departmental policy? Because right now,
I think
you
I
mean
mean
council.
council policy.
Okay.
I mean, I think
Ordinances and
ordinance,
such.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, sorry.
yeah, I think reviewing the ordinances with a equity lens would be a wonderful thing for such a committee to tackle.
Absolutely.
Big job.
Yeah,
Yeah, it took 4 years. I mean,
Just in time to unwind the RFQ.
but it's a long time. When we constitute a committee like this, as part of its charge, we have, we're forming a relationship that is, hopefully has some legs to it, right? It's gonna go on over time. I like the idea of Sonny's idea of a 1-year report back to council, do a reflection at the end of the first year, right? See how it's going. But this is a lot of work to do within a year. How often do we envision a committee like this meeting among themselves, and how often do we envision that they meet with us or report to council or how, whatever?
And do we have a council representative on this committee is another,
Yeah, I think we might
is
have to.
another question.
We're bad at students.
I've been in the garden.
I think it's really important to be able, when we start approaching people or ask a volunteer to serve on the committee, that they know what kind of commitment we're looking for. So, I'm thinking maybe monthly meeting. I would be reluctant to ask volunteers to do it more often than that.
I'm of similar
and
mind.
that's the frequency with which the environment committee
Yeah,
meets,
just
so
once.
it's a good precedent for that.
And then would their feedback come back to council through a potential council representative that sits on that committee, or would they have the power to report themselves to council?
I mean, I would think we'd do it similar, where there's a report out, but I think they would decide also. I think they could decide, okay, for this report out, we want the team here or something like that.
We always have the option to do a workshop
Mm-hmm.
if it's something that necessitates, like, there are some committee meetings where it's simple to just report out. And then there's like, Cheryl's like, oh, the environment committee met last month and this happened and that happened.
Mhm.
And then there are probably some things that would benefit from just the committee and the council doing a workshop together.
Yeah. Or from having another member of the committee with relevant expertise, if Dan Dixon comes and tells us about solar panels or whatever the thing is. Yeah.
How often are we envisioning them reporting to council? I mean, we talked about an assessment, a year assessment, but I think we're gonna want to have interaction with them more frequently than that.
Quarterly.
Quarterly. That would seem reasonable.
Can I interrupt just for a moment? I'm trying to hang back and let you do your work, but I'm unclear about the idea of a council rep. Because if you had a council rep, there would be at least an interim report every month during the council committee update.
Yeah.
So that I have a big question mark and I'm not sure where you guys landed with that.
Yeah. So what I've heard is that we're going to have this committee which meets among itself monthly. There will probably be a council rep on that committee who can report to council monthly, but the committee itself will have the opportunity, maybe not the requirement, but the opportunity to formally address council quarterly. Would that fit within our?
I think that's fine, but I also think with a committee, with a council member there, I almost kind of feel like that's kind of ad hoc.
Well,
as
but
needed.
yeah, here's the thing though, and as much as I would typically advocate for things being approached in the same way. Like I report to everybody about the comp plan committee because I'm the chair of that committee and that's my job, whatever. And generally speaking, it's good when council says policies should be the same or like what we do should be the same across everything. This is one area where I feel like it's not necessarily the move for, I mean, we are creating this committee because we are acknowledging that there is not enough representation of diversity on this elected board to make these decisions. So how do we then justify turning around and having a member of this board be the mouthpiece to interpret what the committee said to the public and to the rest of council? You see what I'm saying? Like, that is taking the voice away from this committee. I mean, what if, now granted, all of us mean very well, and none of us would intentionally subvert the committee or misrepresent what it said. However, because of who we are and where we are and how we're placed, identity-wise and demographically, we might unintentionally misrepresent the conversation of the committee when reporting out what we think we heard. I would rather that they tell us what they are saying than for one of us to come back to the room and say, this is what I think I heard, because I'm hearing it through my ears. And the whole point of forming this committee is that I can't see and hear through my eyes and ears everything that needs to be heard and seen.
So is your point in response to me saying ad hoc, and I think quarterly is fine, but also ad hoc, that it should just be quarterly? Or
No, what I'm saying is I'm relatively uncomfortable with the idea of just a member of council reporting out what happened at the committee meeting monthly. And like, I think it's fine if the member of council that's serving on the committee as a representative wants to come and say, like, these are the things that were discussed, like the items themselves. But in terms of the conversation or characterizing the direction or the movement of the group or what the group wants to do, or, you know, that those kinds of subjective characterizations shouldn't be part of what the council member is reporting out because it's subjective. So I would rather that there be some very firm mechanism for the group to give feedback to council. And that's why I kind of talked about like the planning board letters that we get, or just other ways that the committee itself is voicing the committee's discussion. Yes.
So one suggestion I might have is every committee has minutes of some sort. We don't have committees that aren't, that lack staff. You have staff at every committee. So, I mean, I think the specifics of what happens at committee meetings will be captured in minutes and videos. So I think you both are kind of getting to the same point of regular interaction with council is what I hear Megan wants. But a general monthly report out of they met, they're working on reviewing X ordinance. We plan to have that. It sounds like we'll probably have that for council in Y months. That
Yeah.
kind of,
Wait. As opposed to a council member being on a committee and reporting out. So a complete ad hoc committee.
No,
I just mean like, if, you know, if Cheryl, if you were the council member representing that committee, like if you came back to council and said, the DEI committee had a really lengthy conversation about policy X, and they thought that policy X was probably fine and didn't, maybe had some issues with some small pieces, but they're gonna move forward and blah, blah, blah. That's like subjectively characterizing the
No,
group's
I
conversation.
understand that. I'm trying to figure out what Sophie just said.
Oh.
So
I wasn't saying anything about council rep. I was just
Okay.
saying there are mechanisms in the process that still allow for
objective or,
a
right,
counselor to
Okay.
simply report
Yeah.
out objectively
okay,
and point the community in the direction, just like council.
Okay.
does.
I wouldn't
That's
want
what I
the
was-
counselor to speak for the committee.
right.
I think that would be a mistake.
So we have sort of this hybrid model proposed where the counselor presents a monthly summary of items discussed, what the committee itself reports quarterly to the council, you know, on their own progress. Yeah,
in whatever way they feel most appropriate, whether it's with a committee representative or the entire committee or a subset of the committee.
Okay.
that sounds fun.
Yeah.
And I have really now 3 jobs that we have assigned to the committee to advise council on issues that are coming before council, to bring questions to council on issues that arise within the committee or concerns that are brought to the committee that they can now bring to council, and then begin to review council policies and ordinances as an ongoing charge, right? We'll start with A and some point we'll get to Z and we would start all over again, right? As that goes on. So are there other than those 3 things, are there other things that this DEI committee is then charged with?
Yeah, I think I'd kind of like to add something along the lines of recommendations for ongoing training that the committee feels is important for council staff. Like going back to what I was saying about we need to grow and learn and adapt and gain more insight so that we're not just relying on a committee to provide insight for us.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's one of the sort of 10 suggestions from the ad hoc committee and perhaps some of the other suggestions. We could charge the committee with revisiting that document as well as the sort of ancillary document staff has prepared and look for opportunities within that to build a work plan that makes sense to them.
One thing that you had mentioned earlier is that this committee could have a role in welcoming people to Orono. That is not captured in our target. I think
Yeah.
it's valid and I think
Yeah.
it's important.
And I think the very existence of such a committee does set a tone of welcome. You know, the fact that we now have a DEI page on our website, it says something about our values and the fact that we have put, intentionality into making it so. And the existence of a committee, I think, does set a similar tone of we as a community have decided that this is a priority that we will put intentionality and effort into. I do think it perhaps could be left to the committee itself to figure out exactly in what manner they seek to set a tone of welcome within town, but perhaps that language could be added, that it's the intention of the town of Orono to be a place that is welcoming to diversity. And we hope that this committee will aid us in that work, including by doing this other policy stuff, you're right. But, explicitly mentioning that that's part of the intention, I think. Maybe all that's needed to make that shine forth.
What's the great thing about a charge, right, is that we're not micromanaging what this committee will do. The committee should have agency.
Yeah.
That's necessary. But in setting the charge, we're setting parameters of like, this is the space that we'd like you to occupy, and how you occupy that space should be up to you, because clearly we shouldn't be dictating that.
I mean, perhaps part of what you all discussing about welcoming can also, like, part of the charge can be creating events if they feel it makes sense. I mean, the environment committee has put together some events, right? I think things like that could be really fun.
Totally.
And I think fun is also important.
It is one of my highest priorities.
Okay. So do we have any other comments on the charge of the committee? I would invite any public comment on what the charge of this committee should be.
We do have a hand raised, Sarah Marks.
Okay, Sarah.
So I have allowed
There you
her
go.
to speak.
I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jan.
Hi, thank you all so much. It's lovely to see you all. I like your new setup. It's a really wonderful thing and a great conversation. Much appreciated. I really like where you're coming down about the mission. I think that what I'm saying is not really different, but I just wanted to reiterate. I really agree about the JEDI committee not having a oversight role and just an advisory role. But I really don't think that the committee should have to be asked to give advice on any particular topic to council. because I think that, which I know got discussed earlier, and it seems like you've moved away from that by saying that the committee could bring questions to council on issues and concerns that arise from the committee or are brought to the committee. I think that part is super important. As Megan pointed out, I think really one of the major points of this committee is that we don't have representation from a lot of folks on council. And there's just so many different perspectives that people will bring to the JEDI committee that I assume that they'll see things that people on council or staff can't see, and therefore wouldn't even know to ask for feedback on. So I just want to sort of reiterate to please keep that part that I heard Jeff restate at the end, saying that that group can bring its own issues and concerns. And I heard Megan say not be micromanaged. I think those voices are really important to be heard, because otherwise we're like defeating the purpose of the committee, you know, by not allowing them to bring whatever all those diverse perspectives see needs to be talked about in our town. I don't begin to know what all those things will be, but I would want that to be as open as possible. And I think I just have a question, which I'm sure you all know the answer to, but I don't, and I'm thinking other people listening probably don't. I heard discussion about that the JEDI committee would be asked to review council and town ordinances, but not any staff policies. And I was a little confused on that. Is there a law or ordinance that says that they can't review those? Because it occurs to me again that we have very few people of color and lots of other diverse groups within our staff. So I wonder, you know, they might have perspective that would be helpful for reviewing those policies if they're allowed to. It sounded to me like from your discussion that they're legally not allowed to, but I wondered if you could clarify that for the rest of us listening. Thank you.
Well, I think there are some cases, Sarah, where employees are protected and certainly their privacy rights are protected. There are other policy decisions that the supervisory staff makes that are really operational. So I just don't feel like we necessarily have the expertise to tell somebody that they're, you know, putting the screw in backwards or something like that. You know, I mean, I want the experts to be able to do their job expertly. However, if there is a misapplication of our resources, that in my mind rises to the policy level. And so that would be a concern of this committee and should be a concern of council. Sophia, where am I getting
Typically,
wrong?
the way that this works is council sets policy, and then the manager works with staff to implement that policy in an operational way. So, for example, if someone out there was turning the screw backwards, or we got a complaint, someone went to the committee and said, this person is turning the screw backwards, they're doing a bad job at this, this is a problem because this thing fell off the side of the building. Our goal is not to say, dear committee, please review the screw turning policy. The way that council and the way that municipal government is organized is we say to Sophie, there have been complaints about this thing falling off the building because the screw isn't being turned correctly. We have council set a policy that no things should be falling off buildings and all the screws should be screwed in tight. Can you please look into this? And then Sophie will open up the staff level policy to see what may or may not, or she will do that operational piece. We identify the overarching policy that then guides staff's decision on an operational level.
To Sarah's,
Is that good enough? Sophie looked like she had like a couple notes on what I just said, but well,
I think that mostly makes sense to me, at least. I think to Sarah's comment, I'm now kind of envisioning there could be opportunities for this committee to be helpful, for example, in, you know, being another set of eyes on our hiring practices, and perhaps that's something that is in policy rather than in ordinance. And, you know, there might be those kinds of policy things that, you know, Sophie might wish to have this committee look at, or, you know, we might wish to speak with Sophie about that. And so perhaps leaving it open-ended to some level of less formal policy review could be advantageous.
So people speak.
Sure.
I think that there are policies that probably would make sense to have this group look at. But to open it up to all departmental policies, I mean, we have policies on how you check a plow truck. We have policy, I mean, we have literally hundreds of policies. So, and some of them aren't even within my purview to adopt or not adopt. So we have some high profile ones that make sense, but normally what you would see is town council in the very antiquated, way outdated personnel ordinance would say something about inclusive hiring practices. And now it's my job to make sure that we have best practice policies that meet that standard. Now, with lots and lots of policies and antiquated ordinances, everything takes time. But I think there's a blend here. Where I would be concerned is if every single policy that we had to adopt at the administrative level had to go through alternative committees, because they don't even go through council at this point. And I think, well, I'll leave what I think.
Makes sense. Sarah, thank you. Did that cover your the substantive part of what you were asking?
So she no longer has permission to speak, since that was a fairly long answer from you guys. She does have her hand raised, but in the meantime, Jeff Lowe has raised his hand to speak.
Okay.
Would you like to recognize
Sure.
Sarah?
No,
or-
please.
I think we also have one.
And we
Yeah.
have someone here too.
Yeah, well, let's hear from Chief Lowe, and then we'll hear from a member of our community who's here with us in person.
Okay,
Excellent. Thank you, Councilor Wingard. I appreciate that. I wanted to kind of speak about what I think the whole council has already spoken to. First, I'll say, awesome conversation. Being in charge of fire, police, and EMS, I like where this is going. I like a lot of the things that are being said. I find a lot of value in the comments and some of the recommendations and stuff, especially when we start looking at hiring policy and those types of things. Really good stuff that I think some outside eyes would benefit us with. There are two areas that I want to make sure that as we get this committee set up and the council is aware of, and I think you've already alluded to this, Councilor Wingard, but I just want to hit it again from the public safety director perspective. One is that as we're establishing this committee, these are municipal employees that have different legal rights than private sector employees do. So as we're looking at the authority and scope of a committee and what that committee can do, you have those laws, you have collective bargaining agreements and those types of things that the committee wants to keep in mind. And the second thing is some of the policies that we have are not good policies. We don't necessarily like them, but unfortunately they're regulated by statute or whatever regulatory body is out there that drives some of those. So if you meet resistance or whatever along the way, at least from my perspective, it's not anti-Jedi committee. It's we've got issues, and I would appreciate some conversation around that stuff as it comes up. I guess I just wanted to throw my 2 cents out there and let you know where I stand from the public safety perspective. I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much. Did you have somebody else who wanted to? Please. Yeah, please come on up.
Yeah, speak into the
Just
owl.
shout into the owl.
I'll try my best. Hello, everybody. My name is Raj, and I'm a grad student at the University of Maine as well. As somebody who came from another country to live here in Orono and have lived here for like 3 years, first of all, I really appreciate that we are having this conversation about having a committee for diversity, equity, and inclusion in Orono. My personal experience when I came here was like I knew that I was moving to the most white state of the country, so it was a little scary to be honest. But thankfully, on campus we have a Office of Diversity and Inclusion too at UMaine, and that was really a place for me as a person of color and a person of coming from other culture who was not very familiar with how America is or how Maine is in general. It was a very safe space for me to get to meet other people too, who were coming from a similar background, at the same time, learn more about the culture while trying to share my own story as well. So I just wanted to appreciate that you guys are doing this on a town level now, and it's getting out of the university because I have a lot of friends in the university and outside the university. And I think this is something like which as a progressive city, we should totally be implementing, and I'm really happy you guys are doing it. And I hope we have more spaces like that on a city level for people to meet and like take part in these conversations that are important with them as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sophie, do you have enough from us for that second part on the charge?
I think I do.
Jeff, should I ask Sarah to lower her hand?
Oh, yes, let's hear from Sarah again. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, she's been allowed to speak.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I put my hand up just in case, anyway, it was very helpful to hear the answer you guys gave. I very much appreciated it. Super helpful. I think this is an aside, but I wanted to just say, I would assume you have rules in place that no staff member can ever be talked about by name at any committee meeting or council meeting, correct? I know the school has that, and I would just assume, like, for the public to know that that exists, and that could not happen, right, at any committee. That would be shut down, I would hope. And I did want to just ask on the policies. I've wondered for a long time why the town policies are not listed somewhere on a website for everyone to access, like the way they are for the schools. I know your ordinances can be accessed, but the policies can't. And I know it's not tonight's topic, but I'd like to just put it out there because I know you guys have been working so hard on transparency. And I think it's a really important part of transparency that those get listed somewhere accessible to people eventually also. And mostly just thank you so very much for all your work. You guys are doing a great job.
Just Sarah, real quick, do you mean operational policies or do you mean council policies?
I don't mean council policies. I mean, for the school, there are policies that affect every level that are all listed accessible. So they might affect the council, they might affect teachers, they might affect administrators. They're all listed somewhere that as a citizen, I can click and look at every policy that the school has is accessible to me to see.
Because we have that for OPD, or we were working on OPD policy.
So we have the policies that the community have asked to see out where the community can see it. It would be a project. I'm not saying it's a bad one. But for example, in the fire department alone, policies are probably like yay thick. I mean, and I guess the question comes in with how quickly some of those get adopted to meet state standard. I guess how somebody gets it, when somebody gets administered epinephrine and how that is administered seems like, does the community really need to, I don't know.
No.
I mean, it's public,
No.
but I mean, that's the degree that we get into with standard operating procedures.
I wonder if this could become a future topic for council conversation, is what level of, transparency in our policies would we like to prioritize?
Because I would agree that there are more that could go out. We're just currently not really set up for that, but we've been not set up to do a lot of things that we now shift into. So
I think that's another conversation. Like, it's attached to DEI, but it's beyond DEI.
I think that was a good suggestion from Sonia. We bring this up at another workshop.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I'm going to ask our council chair. So we have this third piece, which is the actual constitution of the committee. Do we have time to address that? Sure.
I think let's try it.
All right.
Give it the old college try, okay.
So, yeah, how many of these people are there? What are they, who are they? How do we invite people to join us? And, I'll tell you, we went through a long process when the ad hoc committee was set up. Ultimately, applications were submitted to the council chair, and I'm not sure what process you went through.
That was before me.
Okay, so there you go.
I did work with Cindy on that.
Yeah.
So we had a combination of like people applied through this open application, and also Cindy and I and staff members and other counselors like reached out personally to members of the community that they thought might be interested in being involved. So it was kind of a hybrid form, which would be my recommendation for something like this, because again, it's like, you're sure you can advertise it and some people will see that advertisement, but like also we all have a lot of connections in the community that we could reach out to and say, like, would you consider applying?
Right, so even the invitees still had to complete the
Oh, yeah.
application. Yeah,
How large was the ad hoc?
15?
Don't remember.
Somewhere in that neighborhood,
Yeah,
I'm not
13
good
to
at
15.
numbers.
That's big.
It was a big committee. Bangor's committee is 12, 8 voting members and 4 non-voting members.
15 seems unwieldy to me, but
Right.
So I did some, as part of the toolkit research, I had done some research on different forms and models and numbers of people. And, you know, when we did this similar exercise last, my recommendation was that the committee should consist of a manageable number of voting members, perhaps a minimum of 5 and no more than 10, appointed by the council to serve maybe 2-year terms. I mean, that was the standard, it seems, but that the inaugural committee, we might have to stagger it so that it's not turnover every time. Membership should be encouraged to be diverse in age, gender, race, ethnicity, mental health, physical ability, religion, socioeconomic status, and type of residence, owners, renters, single-family homes, multifamily homes, etc. As with the ad hoc committee, community-wide call for applications, but also individuals asked to apply. Members should live, own a business, or work at / attend a school within the town of Orono. And so those recommendations all are based, that's not like me and my fancies, that's like based on research that I did into other committees and other cities and towns.
That sounds really like a great starting place to me, and I would like to add worship as one of the categories of.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like the maximum of 10. I think 5 might be on the slim side, but 10 as a maximum seems very reasonable.
10 as a target number seems reasonable to me, for sure.
And there were actually 10 on the ad hoc committee. just now.
Okay.
There was one associate committee member in addition to that.
Always my fear when we talk about committees like this, and we went through a similar process with my employer when we were setting up a DEI committee, is that the tendency is to say, oh, we need people that fit into category X, category Y, category Z. And what that does is in my mind, is that it puts my idea of what diversity is on the committee, and I don't want to do that. And it really negates the power of intersectionality. That is, the people who participate in many communities bring multiple perspectives. And you might have one person who is a great resource to a DEI committee who fits multiple categories. And if our DEI committee structure is only set up to say, oh, we need a person of, this category and this category, then we miss the strength of some of those committee members. So that said, how do we ensure a broadly diverse committee? Sure.
Well, it seemed as though the sort of ad hoc DEI committee that was assembled was a really sort of wonderful and committee that represented a lot of diversity. And I think perhaps we could trust that the same might be true again without too much top-down machination needed. I do refresh my memory. Did we set, and I used like the we that I was not part of at this point, but did council formally put aside a seat for a Penobscot Nation member? Was that something that was made explicit, or is that something that I just imagined would be a good idea and thought might have
No, I
happened?
think we actively, and kind of for the reasons that I think Jeff is getting at, is like actively avoided saying like,
Yeah.
and there are definitely committees in my research
Mhm.
that, like, for some cities where it's like, there must be one person to represent this and one
Yeah.
person to represent that. And I feel very uncomfortable about that because I feel like it's tokenizing. And I also agree with Jeff that it's like, who am I to say what diversity is? Like, yeah, so that's why I kind of leaned into this membership should be encouraged to include perspectives that
Yeah.
cover all of these different identities and demographics. Hopefully the Penobscot Nation.
Would it make sense, once you have the charge, because that's, or at least you've got a draft of the charge, ultimately you adopt that before you put a committee together. But to then, when there is formal agreement on what it's gonna do, and we can show them at least the draft document, we post that with a call for people to apply, try to make it as easy to apply as possible. And have people who are on council, and I would say again, staff, because there are some staff relationships that might surprise some folks. That where staff could reach out and say, we work with you often, you engage the town on many levels, would you consider? But then have all of those applications come back for council to decide like it would normally decide, as opposed to kind of picking and choosing. I know that,
And probably something that we can put on a near future meeting would be, I mean, not near, but like as we adopt this charge, to review the application questions, because Cindy and I did our best to try to allow space to capture folks to represent themselves and not be too narrow with the questions. Like, I think it would be good though for council to take a look at that as we think about how we do outreach to the community to solicit folks to participate.
All right.
Gee, that didn't take long.
No, that really. Well, it's because we haven't really decided anything yet, so.
And we've done a lot of work ahead of time.
Okay, so do we have any other council comments on any of the work that we've done so far, or specifically this last bit? Okay, do we have any more public comment? Yes, please, come on up.
So I also would like to thank you all for taking the time to do this. What I would like to say is that when Megan was listing the list of how committees were composed in at other times, something that I might have missed, maybe I did though, that I think might potentially be useful, and especially since that you have the University of Maine here, is I think it's there's definitely a large, as someone with a lot of large lived experience of different types of diversity. Yes, it's important to have that too, but I think also there are aspects that someone who is maybe a scholar or someone who's been doing research might have a little bit of insight. And because you have the University of Maine here, if you could potentially try to shoot for someone who has some expertise, I'm not really sure it matters exactly which, because they might know some sort of issues that as a layperson I wouldn't know. It might be useful to just like an extra sort of diversity to add. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were really fortunate with the ad hoc committee. We did have a number of committee members who were scholar, and Anila Karunikar was the chair of that committee. We had a professor from the business school who did the survey and all of it. So yeah, we were lucky to get a lot of great folks connected to the university.
The environment committee has been a great
Yeah.
model for that. Experts. Connie, would you like to?
Thank you. I'm Connie Carter, and I just want to say, as somebody who has spent the last 20 years of her life trying to figure out how to cross real and perceived boundaries that are created by a lot of difference, I'm so excited to hear your discussion and the direction that you're going. And it makes me really proud to be part of Orono. And I also just wanted to comment about the makeup of the committee. And Jeff, I think, and Megan, you both talked about intersectionality of people. And I think it's important not to put the burden of my being the white woman voice on a committee or, and it sounds like you did that with the ad hoc committee, that there's a lot of, and not only who they are, but what skills they bring, I guess. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's why, it's kind of why I want, I really want us to dive back into the application, because one of the questions that we spent a lot of time tweaking and that I think really helped was to, like, instead of having a questionnaire that's kind of like trying to get people to tell us what their diversity is, which is terrible to do. We developed a question that was like more, it was like more of a broad, like, how do you see your relationship to this community? Which gives people a lot of space to talk about where they fit, where they see themselves in this community, instead of how the world might see them in this community.
So
One more.
I just
Yes.
wonder if you and I are looking at the same application. So maybe we should get together and make sure.
Please come on up, please.
Hello, Alex Collins. I'm a graduate student at the University of Maine and on and off long-time Orono community member. I just had a couple clear, I really appreciate the work that's being done towards this community. I think, well, toward this committee, for this community. I think it has a lot in common with all the values that I tend to hold. But I just have some clarifying questions, if that's okay. So members of this DI committee, are they appointed via the suggestion of an individual town council member or through a collective review process?
I think we would collectively vote on the adoption of
Okay.
theirs.
And who is in charge of kind of seeking out these people who would be appointed to this committee?
So the seeking out, what we were discussing is having a general application that's advertised to the community that anybody could find and apply to, but that members of council and staff who may have connections in the community would specifically reach out to their network to ask them to apply. So council receives, this is the way that we did it with the ad hoc committee. Council then receives all applications, whether they were targeted applications, like I asked my friend to apply and she did, versus somebody saw it on the website or advertised on our social media and chose to apply on their own, and all of the applications are reviewed by council.
Right, thank you. That answers my question.
Any other comment? Any other comment? Well, all right, so that's it for community development. Thanks,
Good job, Jeff.
Signing out.
Good job, council members. So we'll move on to town managers report.
Okay, I actually have quite a bit, so I'm gonna go as fast as I can tonight. First, I just want to bring to people's attention that the branded silk Memorial Bridge sign has been damaged. We're not exactly sure how it happened, if it was placed in a way that the sidewalk machine got it, or if it was vandalism. And quite honestly, at this point, I'll just take a hit for the sidewalk machine and we're just gonna fix it. I will let you know that it's a bronze sign plaque that weighs about 60 or 70 pounds. We're trying to figure out the best way to get it there and back. So I'm gonna reserve some funds out of this year's budget to be able to do that.
And look at where it's situated. Just in
Oh,
case there's-
absolutely, absolutely.
Perhaps.
What might happen is it might get a little bit of a frame around it that juts out beyond it. So it's the first thing. Second thing, our social media, if you haven't already seen it, is got a post that harkens back to the days of the Goonies, the movie. Yeah, somebody had to explain it to me. I'm just that nerdy. But we're having some issues with people enjoying private property as if it were their own. So building structures on trails that the land trust owns or maintains for like bike jumping and stuff like that, that can't be there for a variety of reasons. So we're putting some posts out. I'm hoping that counselors will share those posts so that they reach a wider audience. Our recreation system, outdoor recreation system, relies heavily on private property owners being willing to join in that effort. When people go off the trail or use the trail in ways it shouldn't be used, or damage signage for the trail, our private property owners are more likely to say enough and not wanna to offer that up. So just really like to get the word out to the probably 5% or less of the population that are
Is there a
causing the
specific
issue.
trail that's?
This one
is it
was
the Stillwater
Piney.
River Trail? or
No,
is
it's
it-
Piney Knoll, although
Okay.
Stillwater River Trail is one that we are constantly kind of dealing with that because so much of that trail is privately owned.
Can I, the last time I was there, the lights, the Christmas lights are still there
On the trail?
on the
Yes,
trail?
that's private.
Right, okay.
I believe that that's on private
It
property.
is
I'll
on-
check it out.
it's-
It is.
Yes,
It is, yeah.
so I can't control that.
Okay.
Christmas lights.
We want
Yes.
to appreciate.
You know, my Christmas lights are still over. my-
Don't you know that Christmas lights
They
turn-
help keep the
or
great
winter
depression
holiday
away.
lights turn into fairy lights?
Yep.
and
They do.
I leave them up year round.
At least they do at my house. The cruisers, both of the cruisers that we ordered last July are actually here, and now they're going through the conversion process to be put into the rotation. So it only took us 10.5 months to get that done. The auditor was here. Tom met with the auditor. They were here for the interim audit. We have reached an agreement with the auditor to do the next section of the audit remotely so that we can save about $1,500 on it. So it's a little bit of savings, and I was assured we don't lose anything in the process. So we're gonna do that. We just want to let folks know that staff had NAMI training, NAMI, National Association for Mental Illness. We earlier or late last month, the all public safety staff had a mandatory 8-hour mental health first aid class. And last week, all of our front-facing staff, so our customer service staff, had a 3-hour de-escalating and identifying crisis training from NAMI. The Rainbow Crosswalk is coming. We had some issue getting the initial white striping down. Can't really put the rainbow in before they position and put the crosswalk down. As soon as it dries out, Rob was hoping Tuesday or Wednesday of this week they would be able to get that done. The crosswalk has to be done early in the morning or between either very early or between the morning commute and the lunch rush. So when it's dry and we can meet those needs, we'll get that done. Just to let folks know, remind you that the Stillwater, the culvert on the way to VZ on Route 2 is scheduled to be fixed finally. That is gonna include about a 30-foot trench. And they will have a road closure for the month, pretty much the month of August is what's planned at this point. So you'll see some stuff about that. Finally, the Mill Street combined sewer separation is complete. That got completed last week. We are thrilled. I can't wait for the next drenching rain so I can run down to WPCF and see if it made a difference.
Municipal government.
I want to just thank Kiwanis. We got a $500 donation for the concert series, so that allows us to do one more concert than we had originally planned. I will have an email out to counselors looking for counselors to welcome folks to host. We will give you the script. You're welcome to use it or not, but we'll get a sign out there so you can.
I got rained out last year.
Shoot, I thought you wanted us to sing.
I need to be back on that.
I
Could
also
arrange that, Leo.
want to make you aware that we had a resident complaint about the Forest Essex intersection. So Rob worked with MDOT. You're going to see a change of traffic pattern there. We followed the ordinance in terms of it went through police and town manager's office for review, but it looks like we're probably going to have some four-way stop there as opposed to two-way stop and throughway. It has not gotten final approval from DOT.
This is
yet.
Forest Avenue, Essex Street, did you say? That's a tough spot.
The final collective bargaining agreement draft has been distributed for signature, so IAFF is planning to sign the 2 copies, and then Tom and I will sign, and it will be in the past, which is wonderful. Still meeting with MAP. So when we have a new contract, I'll let you know. LD 290 is a bill that passed in this last legislative session. For whatever reason, it really didn't hit the radar screen. It is a bill that freezes the tax bill for people over the age of 65. There's no income requirement for it. There's no implementation strategy. It's a bill that is a great idea without very much behind it, and some questions about whether or not it's constitutional. So we are starting to get,
Wait, so you mean like if someone were like a billionaire, but they were 66, then they would only,
And they live in Orono.
that's wild.
State.
Okay.
Must be statewide.
so it's a state law, yeah. So it would not come into effect until next year, meaning the bill that gets implemented or assessed based on FY, on the April 1st, 2023 value. So FY 24. But we're watching it. You might get questions about it, and please don't answer them, because if I can't figure it out, the assessor can't figure it out, and MMA can't figure it out, I don't think members
I'm gonna
of
put a big
council.
addition on the house now.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it quick.
That's strange.
I wanted to give you just a heads up in the economic development hopper. Right now, Mitch is working on 5 different housing development potential projects. Some of them, 2 of those would require some council action on zoning. So just be prepared, that would come up fast, and we would want to, I think, facilitate that. The Tyler is set and ready to go to the planning board in July. The UMaine Hotel site development plan, so the hotels on the University of Maine campus, that had gotten Orono Planning Board site plan review approval, but it then, from on their end, had to go through a National Park Service process, and it got kicked back with direction that now in July has to go back to the planning board. I just want people to know that that is not a town staff reason that it came back. We have a few Mitch is working on some efforts to try to fill downtown and other vacancies. And at the same time, he is also continuing to work with the university around trying to expand some possibilities. So there's a lot of activity happening. As we've been through before in previous councils, economic development, you get 10 great things happening that get you all excited, and 2 or 3 of them might come to fruition. I'm sharing with you the ones that are more likely. So we've got some stuff. We continue to work on the Working Communities Challenge grant, and I think it would be good to have Mitch come in and give a presentation to the council about that. That's taking some considerable staff time, and is trying to get the region to work together to deal with some workforce issues. That is the several $100,000 grant coming out of the Fed Bank. Last week, I met with town staff and our consultant to talk about low impact development ordinance as part of the MS4 permit. We are required to adopt a low impact development ordinance application in some fashion. It might not come through as an ordinance, but rather embedded within our ordinance. We're thinking it probably would come through as part of site plan review. We are required to get a model or a framework together to DEP by September. So we're working very diligently to try to at least get a framework that you guys can agree to. It's not the ordinance. We then have a year to get the ordinance in place. I had, Kyle is also working to bring you back some revisions to the parking ordinance. We are in, I think, the final stages of negotiating a consent agreement to resolve the violation of the grease spill in the Pine Street parking lot. The property owner has come to the table, at least in this stage, really understanding that it can never happen again. And so what I think you'll see is a pretty hefty fine with a lot suspended. See, we received notice today that our Zoom equipment, there's been a backlog, back order. We have asked them to try to source some different pieces to try to get it done sooner. We're also trying to see what exactly those parts do, because if we could get the rest of it done and then bring those parts in later, that seemed like it would be a good idea. Although the double owl, I think, is helping things a bit. This week, we're going to say goodbye to Rob St. Louis after 32 years of dedicated service. I also want to let you know that our finance manager, Connie Thorne, has decided she wants to try semi-retirement and being a grandmom, and is going to put her shingle out for bookkeeping services. I have already taken steps to promote our deputy to manager, and you will see a staff accountant position advertised. Speaking of advertised, right now, since Tom asks me frequently what we have open, we have a WPCF operator, a public works operator or laborer. Rob is continuing to evaluate if we have a laborer that would move into the equipment operator role, and we would hire a laborer, or if we're going to hire the operator. We have an anticipated firefighter paramedic position, and we still have 2 police patrol officers that are vacant. And I think that is the quick and dirty of that's this week.
Busy.
It's a busy
I
time.
have one item that I'd like to share with council before we leave tonight. It involves a concern that was sent to both Sophie and me by an Orono resident. And it was about a letter supporting a political candidate in the most recent primary election that was signed by 4 town councilors with Orono Town Council under their name, with a disclaimer statement at the bottom of the page. And the resident who contacted us said, is this an indication that the town council has taken an official position in support of a candidate? And it certainly was not. As far as I'm concerned, we never discussed it at a council meeting, was never a vote on it. And it's not something that we would normally do, take a position as a council on a candidate. Town councilors are certainly welcome to support political candidates or political issues that they want to support. But I do think that as we enter the election season, it's going to be really important to make sure that there's no question that it's not a town council position, it's an individual councilor position. I can understand the concern raised by the resident because it did, he was looking at what it said underneath the name and didn't say Orono Town Councilor, it said Orono Town Council. And to me, that is a reasonable thing that, an uninformed citizen might think that we are taking position. So I did want to bring it to your attention. Not a big deal. There's no reason you can't support any candidate of your choice, just as long as we're really clear that it's not a town council position. And that's it for me. Motion to adjourn.
I had one other thing I
Oh,
wanted
yeah,
to raise.
please.
I don't know when exactly we might want to take it up, if we do, but I found compelling the concern that I think was emailed to all of us earlier today from a citizen about the Penobscot County Jail's proposed expansion, and whether or not we would take a position on that one way or the other, either as individuals or as a council. And I was wondering if, like, what the process would be for us discussing such a thing.
So first, it would be awesome if I could get, if somebody
I can
would
forward it to you
forward
right
that
now.
to me.
I have not seen.
Oh, you weren't on?
No.
We all got it.
And
I think it just came today. I received it as well.
so I wonder, and I'm just speaking off kind of cuff, is it would seem to me that it would make sense for us to perhaps hear from the county administrator and the sheriff who runs the jails to understand what the proposal is. And then from that point, I think council would make its own decision whether it wanted to wade into a separate political discussion about that. In my time in Orono, the town council has not really gotten involved in county endeavors that are not more operational in nature. I think the impetus for that is that the county commissioners are, kind of right down the hill. But just because we haven't done it doesn't mean we can't. But I would think that before you weigh in on what it means, it would make sense to first understand what's out there, because this has been ongoing. And the municipalities haven't really been involved, so it would make sense for council, if you have the question, to be informed. But I also know that at times, sometimes people are trying to either get support for something that has been shut down, or my guess in this case is that there is a proposal floating. I haven't even seen a proposal.
I've been aware of the process of people trying to expand the jail for a while, and I have my own thoughts on it. This citizen in particular is a criminologist who I think, but also I think it's right, as you suggested, to hear from county commissioner and others. I think it'd also be good to hear from the citizen if he's willing to bring his own expertise on the issue, who says that there are mountains of evidence for the negative effects in the face of some of the crisis he lists. I'll let you read the email. I think several of us just forwarded it to you.
Yeah.
forwarded it to you.
I love it.
Five
I
times now.
absolutely support the suggestion that we find out exactly what is being proposed first. I wouldn't want to even
Yeah.
speculate without knowing exactly what is being proposed and what's not. In terms of the fact like, oh, this isn't typically what municipalities do, my argument against that would be, much in the same way that council had a very specific conversation about, like when we make investments with the First, for example, that the town would not invest in subsidies that the citizens of this town would not support investment in. We do pay tax dollars to Penobscot County, and I think that if our residents wanted a voice to where their money was going, then that's something that we should entertain.
And there are also other municipalities who apparently have been weighing in, like Brewer. So, I think it is worth us considering whether or not we find a position.
Do they have a public hearing process as well, if to do something like that, to have an expansion?
Yeah, I mean, and it would also be a public referendum because they don't have the money
Okay.
to manage it. But my thought is not about the topic specifically, Rob, because it's not a municipal topic. I'm not weighing in on the topic. It is in that it is a municipal topic. It's not my purview, I guess is my, and I think you'll find like our chief of police probably has some thoughts about that too, that you might want to hear. But I guess my perspective is more, if you knew what the proposal was, is it what's codified here, you know, is it what's described here, or is it something different? And also what the public process is going to be, because if they're gonna come around and do individual hearings or information sessions in every community, then it might make sense for council to join that. So I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other. I'm just,
We may not want to be reactionary based on a political hot topic, but rather be educated and informed about what's happening and what the process will be, and then take part in the process in a way that makes sense. Yes.
yeah, I guess I'm just looking for some general information and understanding of what their next steps are. And then to then have council decide how much time it wants to add to that in your fairly constrained time.
No, I'm certainly not proposing we have a discussion, which none of us are informed about what we're discussing. I certainly want us to get informed about it, but I'm just.
Plenty of
raising
people are happy to do exactly that. though.
But I'm raising this just to put it on the radar. I'm not sure what the process is for getting this to the point where we're ready to have a discussion on it. I just wanted to bring it up.
So is the next step, Sophie, you bringing us back some information from the county
Yeah,
administrators of what their process
me-
is going to be? And
Let me figure out kind of what the exact proposal is so you can take a look at it and what its process would be from a public standpoint. And then y'all can decide what you want next. I think one of the things that we run into from time to time is when we jump at, it's this person and let's kind of duke it out, which we kind of did with the water. That didn't go well. So I think if you guys could figure out what the topic is and what the town kind of conversation would be about that and have some of the background. I know that this process has been unfortunately incredibly long.
Thanks, everybody, for letting me take that time.
that's good. Glad you brought it up. Anything else for the group?
I got a spaghetti supper waiting for me.
So do I.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
In favor.
All in favor? Yes. All right, everyone's in favor.
So the Carl on there, I think is my ride.